Hi folks, welcome back to the studio. This is, I think, episode 5 of the Missing Few saga. A very complicated, emotional story. An astonishing story, actually. So, because it still hasn't gone away, I think it's important to understand all the facts, hence why doing this series of videos. And a friend of mine, Philip Harvey, said I think it's a great idea to do it in bite-sized chunks like this, and it is, because it is such a complex matter and there's such a chronology to how this whole thing has progressed over the years since, say, 1970-71, and I chronicled that, if you like, in Missing in Action, Resting in Peace. It's not sales pitch, it's long since sold out, years and many years ago, which came out in 98, because then I thought it was important to present the facts, to present the different points of view, and see how it all unravels, really. So we're going to talk in this episode about a few more of the recoveries from the early 1980s, and bearing in mind that we've got to a point where the MOD are mighty upset with what's happening, and there is no power of law attached to the notes for guidance issued to recovery groups by the Ministry of Defence, and although a licence is required to recover a crashed aircraft, there's no penalty if that's contravened. So it's quite a difficult situation, isn't it, for the Ministry? I can see that. Anyway, the last one that we looked at was John Brimble, which Steve Vizard masterminded the recovery of, and who has 2 graves, because a certain amount of remains were recovered at the time, buried as unknown at Sittingbourne, which friends and I had named, proved that it was him back in 98, and had the grave name. So that was the last one. So now, moving on from that, and Brimble, the Brimble recovery was in September the 14th, 1980, which was actually the 40th anniversary of him being shot down. He was shot down on the 14th of September 1940. And a year later, on the 23rd of August 1981, we have the recovery of Pilot Officer Colin Francis. Now this is interesting as well, because time and time again, when you study the day-by-day battles and the movements of squadrons and the casualties, you'll suddenly find a new squadron number and bang, 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 maybe half a dozen losses, be that fatals, wounded, shot down, bailed out, force landed, but shot up in combat, whatever. And such was the case with 253 Squadron, who arrived from the north to Kenley on the 29th of August 1940, and straight away on the 30th they get an absolute hammering. They get bounced by 109s, lost 4 pilots, 4 Hurricanes damaged, 4 destroyed, 1 pilot wounded and 2 killed. One of those buried just down the road from where I am now at Badgington, Pilot Officer Jenkins, who it was rumoured was shot on his parachute, a vicar's son. And a third, Pilot Officer Colin Francis, was posted missing. And missing indeed he would remain for over 40 years. Now, again, the situation with this is that we've got this now where the MOD is refusing licences on aircraft of missing airmen, which is understandable. So we've already had the situation with Brimble where a licence was applied for in respect of an aircraft that a pilot had bailed out of, which was granted, only for it to end up being a fiasco for the MOD with Brimble being recovered. And this was the case with this. And the licence was applied for for Jack Bell, 616 Squadron, Flying Officer Jack Bell, who was shot down in combat over West Malling on the 30th of August, same day, but he wasn't missing. His body was recovered at the time, and he was appropriately buried. So a licence was issued, and lo and behold, it's Colin Francis who is recovered. But this is quite interesting, in as much as there is discovered the plate, the maker's plate, L1965, identifying the Hurricane beyond any doubt, and shreds of uniform fabric. And so immediately there was an iron grid placed over the hole, the site was shut down, and the MOD decided that the recovery could continue the following Wednesday, but under the supervision of RAF personnel from Biggin Hill. That was duly done, and the RAF consequently removed the pilot's remains to the local police station, and the coroner was informed, and the MOD then traced the pilot's family, and a cousin was found, and the inquest was held at Tunbridge on the 8th of September 1981, which returned a verdict of death on active service. And on the 29th of September 1981, Pilot Officer Francis was given a full military funeral at Brookwood and joined others of the missing few in that War Graves cemetery. So this was a first, really, because this again is Steve Vizard's Tunbridge Aircraft Museum, and the fact that the MOD allowed the enthusiast to continue the excavation under the supervision of the RAF is a whole new development. I would argue it's extremely sensible, because it's the enthusiasts who have the experience of recovering these aircraft, and they should be able to do it with the RAF standing by that don't have that experience. It just stands to reason. So I thought that was quite a step forward in a way. And then 2 years later, August the 11th, 1983, Steve Vizard again, and Steve says, we were searching for a Spitfire at Holywell Point near Burnham-on-Crouch in Essex, but found the modification plate confirming the aircraft to be a Hurricane. Further research indicated that the aircraft concerned was that flown by a pilot officer, Ramsey. By coincidence, around the same time, his mother's death notice appeared in the Daily Telegraph, placed by his cousin, Miss Joan Worth. And Andy Saunders contacted this lovely lady who actually worked for the MOD and had grown up with Pilot Officer Ramsey. The facts were put to Miss Worth, who concluded that her cousin must be recovered, as her aunt had always agonised over her son's fate. And that's the thing, isn't it? With people who are missing, there's just no closure. And it's so important to have that closure. And in this case, instead of just going straight out and recovering Ramsey, because Miss Worth worked for the Ministry of Defence and was on site, she actually presented the case to the MOD that that her cousin should be recovered. Now, as we've seen, the Ministry of Defence's stance is one of non-disturbance, of letting sleeping dogs lie, if you like. And unfortunately, the RAF, the MOD rather, would neither task the RAF or the enthusiast to go ahead and do it. So, the recovery was refused. One of the reasons given was that Dickie Lee of 85 Squadron was also missing from the day in question. Although accounts from the time confirm that he was actually lost 30 miles out to sea. So, bit, you know, dubious, isn't it, really? But, yeah, Miss Worth was disappointed, but she then visited the crash site at Holywell Point and really confirmed her own resolve to see her cousin recovered. So the enthusiasts resolved to do a major recovery, 11th of August 1983, and suffer the consequences, basically. So The mortal remains of Pilot Officer Ramsey were duly recovered and reported to the local police, and after the subsequent coroner's inquest, Pilot Officer Ramsey was buried with full military honours at Brookwood Military Cemetery. And Steve says, this time we had the backing of a relative, but the MOD still refused to cooperate. Our unauthorised recovery was only undertaken as a last resort, therefore. At the funeral, the MOD tried to prevent us from communicating with the relatives, which wasn't the first time that had happened. But Miss Worth kindly took us back to her hotel, where a buffet tea had been arranged for us. That, I think, indicates the level of support she gave us and reflects the family's appreciation. Indeed, it does. But this isn't the end of it. This is now where it's really getting going, because April the 27th, 1984, sees Flying Officer Michael Duke Dalton of 601 Squadron recovered, another Hurricane pilot. And this was a right saga, because 13th of August 1978, the Essex Aircraft Historical Society excavated the crash site of a Hurricane south of Wellington Church near Romford in Essex. There was no confirmation of which aircraft it was discovered, and the enthusiast research suggested that the aircraft had crashed on 31st of August 1940, and they believed that the most likely candidate was Hurricane P3159, which was the aircraft of a 26-year-old Czechoslovak, Pilot Officer Jaroslav Stubacek of 310 Squadron based at Duxford, who was missing. There was no human remains reported, so it's a bit strange that as at least one other Hurricane remained missing from the day in question, that there was such a firm conclusion drawn that it was Stubacek's aircraft. But anyway, we won't go into that. So, yeah, I mean, on the day, which 31st of August 1940, and there's a big scrap, and 310 lose two pilots, Stubacek and Krebder. Now, Krebder bailed out safely, but Stubacek is missing. So the 310 Squadron diary says Pilot Officer Stubacek's aircraft was seen to go down very steeply. Presumed that he went into the Thames. Pilot Officer Stubacek has the proud distinction of being the first Czech fighter pilot to give his life for England. So some years later, the Medway Group questioned the conclusion that that site was Stubacek's Hurricane, and they believed more likely it was Krebder, which is quite convenient really, because Krebder bailed out, so there'd be no problem getting a licence. And on that basis, the MOD did grant permission for a recovery. But the Medway Group were also aware that the Stubacek family was very keen that Jaroslav should be found and buried appropriately, as Dave Smith recalled, who was a member of the group at the time and involved in the whole thing, and very helpful to me when I was producing the book. So 27th of April 1984, the enthusiasts gather, and the Hurricane is recovered. It was a very difficult dig, as I understand it from Dave, and actually at 15 feet down they had to rescue the digger from its ramp when its tracks became stuck in the clay. So, and by then there was very little of the aircraft found. So at 20 feet deep, the digger then lifts out the tailwheel assembly, complete with the rubber tyre still inflated, and then a further 5 feet down, so 25 feet down now, a complete and unopened parachute pack was found. Now, in a single engine fighter, single seater fighter, the pilot sits on his parachute. So if there's an unopened parachute found, it can only mean one thing, and that's that the pilot's remains are also present. And indeed, that proved to be the case. But the identity of the aircraft was discovered from a piece of wreckage a panel actually from the aircraft's tail, and it was Hurricane R4215. So that's not Sturbacek's hurricane. So this is actually Flying Officer Michael Dalton, 601 Squadron, and he was subsequently buried in what was a private funeral at Salehurst in Sussex with his family and friends. So the problem with this is that the Sturbaceks were very upset that it transpired not to be Jaroslav Sturbacek. And this really sort of vindicates, if you like, the MOD's policy. And, you know, as the MOD had to tell Mr. Sturbacek that the remains discovered were actually those of someone else, of Flying Officer Dalton. And as Dave Smith said, and as I quoted in the book, for the Sturbacek family, the anguish still goes on. It is easy to be critical with the benefit of hindsight, although Michael Dalton's recovery did raise many issues. Hopefully the decisions taken at the time proved to be the right ones for his family. So at least Michael Dalton was brought in from the cold and recovered and buried appropriately. So, but the MOD's insistence that recovery groups, researchers should not contact the families of the missing and to build up their hopes, this vindicated that, because enthusiasts had been in touch with the Sturbacek family and had indicated to them that the site was Jaroslav's crash site, and of course it transpired not to be. So it did vindicate that military defence policy. But that wasn't the end of it, because the same year, I think it is, or the following year, 22nd of September 1984, we now have the first Luftwaffe airman to be recovered, Unteroffizier Fritz Bookner, since Eckhard Schlecker was recovered in 1977. So in 1975, a site was excavated at St Nicholas at Wade on the Isle of Thanet, but abandoned because the depth of the aircraft was beyond the ability of the digging equipment available at the time. So, and in fact, the deep hole crumbled and caved in, and there was all kinds of difficulties. But the aircraft's Verken number was discovered, which is its serial number, on a plate 3874, confirming it to be a Messerschmitt 109 E1 of 6 Staffel JG3, shot down by 56 Squadron's Flying Officer Ken Marston on the 26th of August 1940, another day of very heavy fighting. And lo and behold, the pilot, Unteroffizier Fritz Bookner, remained missing. So he's there, isn't he? 21st September 1984, Andy Saunders led a team with Steve Vizard in there and commenced work at the site. The engine and the cockpit section were recovered at 40 feet. Phenomenal, 40 feet. Together with the remains of the pilot, with which were found Unteroffizier rank badges and a handkerchief embroidered FB for Fritz Bookner. So there's no question that this was Fritz Bookner, but the Germans were unwilling to accept that the pilot found was Fritz Bookner, which is ridiculous really, because you've got the handkerchief with his initials, plus you've actually got the Verken number of his aircraft. So why that was, God knows. The German authorities put little effort apparently into tracing the Bookner family, so that was left to the enthusiasts, who traced 80-year-old Frau Emma Humus, living in Augsburg, who was Bookner's sister. And the inquest wasn't actually held until the 1st of July 1986, nearly 2 years after the recovery. And the proceedings lasted 3 hours, during which there was a letter from the pilot's nephew read out to the court, expressing gratitude to the enthusiasts, and the coroner, Rebecca Cobb, agreed that Fritz Bookner had been found, and furthermore confirm from the evidence available that he had been shot down by Ken Marston. So Unteroffizier Fritz Bookner was then given a military funeral and laid to rest under a named headstone at the huge German war cemetery on Cannock Chase. So the question is, and I put in here, in view of the fact that in 1975 the site had been confirmed to have been that of a missing pilot, the question has to be asked is, was it right for the 1984 excavation to go ahead? People have got different views on that. Steve and Andy, I know, would feel very strongly, and still do, that they did the right thing by going in there and recovering Fritz Bookner. But there we are. It's just this. I think I've written in the book here. It's a triumph over the apparent apathy, insensitivity, and inflexibility of authority, which appears indefensible on occasions. But it's much more complicated than that. Now, we've now got up to where we are. Well, we're in 1986 in the next episode, and the Protection of Military Remains Act is going through the House and is going to become law and give the weight of law to the Ministry of Defence and change everything really. So there was a little flurry of recoveries before the Act came in, and we'll look at that next time. So it is all quite complicated, and that's why we're doing it in chapters almost in this way, but stick with it, because we're going to look at the Protection of Military Remains Act in detail. We're going to look at the recoveries after the Act, because there have been some, assess the situation where we are now. Plus, I'm hoping to get a very special guest in to the studio for something like episode 10. We're just waiting to hear whether that's going to be authorised by the Ministry of Defence. And after that, I may well get another special guest in from the other side of the coin to state the view. So we've got all of the views covered. So there we are. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Join the community. You can subscribe for free. Any comments, please leave in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.